Formscapes, Flowscapes and Mindscapes. Landscapes of forms, of beings. Landscapes of changes, movements, flows. And landscapes of information, perception, awareness, consciousness. These landscapes would be glimpses at a given point in time, but what would interest me more behind is what I would be able to call the morphology, sort of the geomorphology of these landscapes. But geomorphology would imply that what shapes the landscape is mostly the earth. So that's also what we could call the cosmomorphology, or cosmos implying everything. So the plural matrix that interweaves its influences to shape anything at any given point in time is the focal point here. Now, the specific content I'm trying to provide here, or to elicit from the eventual stray listener, is the actual direct transposition of ideas into practices, and of emotions or content of the energy level being translated into physical level or emotional level, mental level, social level, spiritual level, psychic level, technical level. So this is very abstract before you actually start to practice it. So let's go back to a cosmology of shapes. A shape, as far as we can explore it, would first be a dot, focal point of interest, focal point of perception. Whatever the size of it, I've got one dot, one unit of curiosity. This dot is non-dimensional. It would exist over a background, which is a relative emptiness and relative contrast to it. But since it has no possible comparison with anything else first, it cannot imply measurements, or it cannot imply comparing to anything. This non-dimensional dot can expand into something of a surface. So the dot in its ID can be seen with a zoom as say a circle if it's regular, or a blot of ink if it's not. It can expand into infinity, both by growing or by us zooming in. If we zoom on a tiny dot enough, it fills the entire field of perception, and the entire field of awareness, the entire consciousness. It becomes a background on its own through the process of zooming in, or through the process of expanding out, or through any nuance or blend of both processes. The reverse process is the dot can collapse into nothingness. By zooming out, the dot can become smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, or by becoming smaller, say the focal point is a general perception of a dot, but then the focal point would become the center of this dot, and then the center of the center, and the center of the center of the center, with this idea of a recurring and reiterating movement of concentration. There, the dot would at one point become so small or so remote that it would eventually dissolve into a black hole. That's a kind of a joke, but at the same time it's something that's found in many practices. So say we start from just a shape, a dot, that can be without even changing it, by zooming in, by changing the relationship, perceptual relationship with it. The dot can become the universe, or it can become nothing by zooming out. Similarly, the dot, if it's a universe, can expand, as can be seen from the instance I'm giving. There's actually no difference between the expansion of the universe and the zooming in. There's no way to know. That's why the actual unfolding or expansion of the universe itself is necessarily blended into the consciousness that knows it. And the consciousness that knows it, so consciousness means that with which you know, and knowing means that there's an object of awareness that will have sufficient duration in memory to become something, or to stay something. The perception of what chaos can be is a point of it's not chaos cannot really be space or surface, since the idea behind is that it is infinite creation without duration and memory. So infinite arisal and emergence of new things without any order, any structure, allowing it to last over time. Even the idea of time implies a sequence of memories. So without these memories, without this background of what's conserved compared to what changes, there can be no time or no experience of time, even in the simplest sense of it. So chaos would be this point on non-existent arisal of new things. Complete order would be the exact opposite. It would be the complete fixation of one structure. So the structure of the now would arise via chaos and freeze. And from the amount of linkages, relationships, nothing could move, nothing could evolve ever again. There's absolutely no gaps, no levels of degrees of freedom. It's so tight that nothing could change. So that would be absolute order, absolute law in, say, the fantasy world of Michael Moorcock. You'd find that's where I discovered these ideas long time before I found them in complexity theory, in sciences and whatnot. Chaos and law. And then you find that in thermodynamics and in complexity theory, chaos theory and whatnot. And so from the forms, the cosmology of forms, derive actual energies, potentialities for change. So the two potentialities we saw, one would be concentrating, and it's basically could be putting things, concentrating could also be called centralizing. You take a center, something that's in the middle of the middle of the middle of the middle, and you bring everything closer and closer to this center in a continuous process. Centralizing is closely related for sight to the idea of a focal point. I fix something, and then I have more and more informations over an area that's potentially smaller and smaller if I keep on focusing. If I keep on zooming in, the idea would get close. The zoom will give the impression of bringing something closer or making it bigger. As we saw, it cannot be differentiated. It's the same idea of the blood that becomes the universe or becomes nothing. So zooming in, the idea is to copy the bringing closer to oneself, the getting closer to something, or the making bigger of something. Concentrating doesn't necessarily imply zooming in. You could make a center that's far away from you, and you can make a point, a focal point that's very far, and constantly bring your awareness, your perception more and more towards this point. But incidentally, it will have effects on your perception, and you will make this point bigger one way or another, be it only in consciousness. So both would be interrelated, and once again, they're interrelated in ways that are not easy to extricate or to explicate, to unfold, due to this interweaving of the beingness and consciousness through processes, through changes, through energy. These three layers, forms, flows, and consciousness and minds, depict the trinity of Jinqi Shen, for instance, in China, or the more modern matter, energy, information. What we can do using just a simple shape and its potential becomings is already gigantic. Just the actual applications of concentrating, centralizing, or the reverse processes of expanding, decentralizing, or spreading, distributing, like many nuances of this idea of expansion. So these things have immense practical applications in all potential fields. The most obvious one is used for perception. So you take one point, say the tip of your finger, you can play with bringing it closer, and you take a focal point. You centralize your awareness. You want a lot of information over a small surface or a small number of objects. If you keep focusing, eventually it will have the effect of zooming in. You see more and more of less and less. And there already you could start to feel that if you see more details of your finger, you see the small dots of the blood and the areas where the blood is concentrated, redder and whiter areas around. But now if you switch from perception directly to feelings, to proprioception, so outer perception turns inwards a bit, just from looking more and more and more into your finger, or into a point into your finger, you'd feel that the feeling in the finger is changing. And eventually the feeling changes more and more exactly at this point where you're concentrating more and more. So now you could switch, and instead of concentrating your sight or your perception, you could concentrate the actual feeling, the sensation you get. You copy it and you make it more and more focal. You bring it more and more and more to the center, and the center of the center of the center of the center of the center. Amongst the various layers that will create the feeling you get, you'd have feelings of heat, feelings of some nervous layers, small movements, and you could take any of those constituents of your feelings, and you could actually grow through this reverse process. You make something grow by bringing more awareness, more consciousness into it. When you bring more consciousness into something, you make its universe bigger. For instance, if you start inquiring or just noticing something crawling on the ground, and you ask what it is around you, and then your parents or people passing by will tell you that the things you see are insects. So the insects would cover pretty much all sorts of creepy, crawly, dirt-like tiny dots of matter. Without more clarity in the definition, without a more focalized definition than the one you'd get as a child, if you point towards something, someone tells you this is an insect, but what you point towards is undefined for you. It's just basically dirt crawling. So there would be absolutely nothing to differentiate for you between this and actual dirt moving. The amount of information, the centralizing of information that needs to be done to make the category expand and define its border so that it excludes many things that it's not supposed to include in its proper meaning, is already quite big. It's a learning process. So you'd get a lot of differentiation. You'd get many answers telling you that no, this is not an insect, before you start to create the counter shape of the insect category. But now your insect category at first is made up of, say, only the insect you've seen, only the creepy crawly you've seen. And for most people it would stay the same. It's this undistinct category of bad things, of scary things, of ugly and dirty things. But if at any time your curiosity is caught and you start investing awareness into the insects, then very soon you discover that what you thought was just one thing becomes 10, becomes 100, becomes 1,000, becomes millions. And then any level of detail you could get, you could start giving. If you inquired more into insects over time, you won't use categories as broad as insects. You'll use families, and then you'll use species or subspecies and whatnot. If you get more detailed into your perception, if you focalize more and more, at one point you'll see an insect as an individual. And you'll see this individual as changing in its various activities or periods of the year, or cycles, for insects, most obviously cycles of life, where they would actually change so completely that the actual idea that it could be the same being is would necessitate a lot of information and a definition of what is a being that's specific. So we look at the continuity of neither shapes or forms or structures. We look between the caterpillar and the butterfly, for instance. We look at the sort of a genealogy of matter. You see the dissipative structure, like the small whirlpool, that's filled again and again with different water, although it retains a general pattern that makes you call it a whirlpool. But the whirlpool is never the same energy, and it's never the same actual matter, and it's never the same information either. It's only at a distance things become smaller, become less dense in information, less concentrated, so more distributed, but also another way to say distributed would be more diluted. This diluted information would allow you to perceive something as so you'd see the insect as being the same just because it maintains the same center of beingness. It's the same point, and defining that this point will deserve to be called the center of being, as opposed to saying that from the time the nympha is gone, or the imago is gone, an insect will die and be reborn and become another being. These things, once again, they're just so intricately woven blend of perception, processes, forms, matter, dots, and consciousness, minds, that it's nigh impossible to unweave it, although we do it all the time for necessary reasons and for many unnecessary reasons. But we do it all the time with oftentimes a very wrong or flawed perception. We have to use this focal or peripheral or general global holistic perceptions or points of view. But if we start to think that what we describe, the categories we use at one level, are preeminent to the actual thing that is unfolding before us, it's a very, very big danger. Here also, it's a big danger, but it's another instance of this blending, complete blend of matter, energy, information. It's fairly simple to use practical analogies like the common building analogy, where information is the plan, or all the ideas that give birth to the planification, the organization of the building. Then energy is the work, the actual shifting, moving, changing of things to put them in order. And matter is the material. So energy would include the workers. Matter would also include the workers. So at all these layers, it seems very obvious that it's very discrete and very definite. As soon as you pass the first layers of practical analogies, things become much more blurred. Once again, there's no way to extricate the Mindscapes from the Formscapes, from the Flowscapes. Matter is flowing. Matter at whatever scale. The earth we see, or the rocks we see as frozen, are just seen due to the time lapse of our perception. If we saw it fast forward, as is done oftentimes in computer simulations or movies on the internet, everything is flowing. If you slow down enough, everything is static. So once again, this idea that you can play on time, you can play on space through the process or the relationship between beingness, energy changes, and perception or awareness or consciousness of things, in itself gives rise to zillion applications in all domains. So now we used perception. So the game you can do to discover focal perception and zooming in blended, you bring your finger closer and closer to you, you'll get to the visual aberration, the three-dimensional. You could close one eye and get closer. Then you could take one hand and close it as a lens for getting smaller and smaller till you get to a point when it's blurry. Then you go in exactly the reverse direction. You stretch, you open both eyes, and you look right behind. And there your fingers should fork or like double and blur at the same time, but you feel the vision has increased immensely. And you could keep doing that layer after layer. You could, in the new field of vision, you could and most likely you do focalize further away, and there again you can make it bigger and go past it and include it into another layer that's at another scale again. So now let's use it for energy work. You take a point, say the center of your hand, and you bring your awareness more and more and more and more into the center, again and again and again. And it doesn't matter at all that it drifts all around, that you get distracted, for as long as you keep the direction. So it's not a result that you look for, it's a movement, it's a process. You're concentrating, you're not concentrated. Concentrated would mean that it's done, you're completely here, which would in some way be possible, but if someone is only concentrating and not concentrating, it is only a state, sort of an aspect of a form. A state means comes from the same word as being in Latin. Ex is same root. Being, être in French. It's all the same root. So if you are something but you're not becoming more of it, you could easily be changed. Any vector force, any change going in another direction on something that's static will change it. So if you are concentrated and something comes to distract you, you will get distracted. If you are concentrating as a process, a movement, a continuous change, for as long as you maintain this vector force, you can have other vector force interacting with it and adding or subtracting. And so what will happen will be the result of this matrix of interaction. But still, it will keep going in the same direction. It could be pushed back. As soon as the energy lessens, it gets back in. So that's one aspect. You can be concentrated, matter, form. You can be concentrating, energy, change, flows, action. And we'll see later the informational aspect. Now, your hand. So if we want it to go faster, you touch the center of your hand and you bring all your awareness below the finger at the contact point. If you're used to it in just a matter of seconds, the feeling changes strongly. You start to feel the waves of your breath. It's not that your breath reaches there, it's that it's always been there. And just your awareness zoomed in sufficiently for you to take notice. And same, another zoom, another level, and you feel your pulse. And another zoom, another level, and you start feeling tiny movements of your nerves, fascia layers, muscles, and you could go on and on. You could feel the flow of energies. So say if you moved, for instance, so energy creeps people out, mostly because of complete lack of practice. Energy is anything that can elicit, generate, alter, or prevent change. It's ergo something that's at work. When you do work, you can try to generate a change, you can try to prevent a change, or you can try to alter a change. That's pretty much, it's very difficult to find a category of work that would do anything else than that. So anything is basically energy. If I watch, I see you, if I'm just not seeing you but just watching you, or I talk to you, even more if I touch you, right away a change is created. So when you touch your hand, if you touch with your finger, it's obvious. If you touch with your eyes, if you're used to it, it's still obvious. If you touch with your mind, with your awareness, or if you touch just with your intention or your imagination or whatnot, there's contact that will change the state, and that will change the flows and the actions and the potentialities. Energy is all the things you use to elicit change. So basically, like all the idea of there's no energy and whatnot, this is just very sad. Like people say that using the internet with the wireless and plugged on electricity and using radio waves to listen to the radio. That's you have energy all around. You use it all the time, or you would not be able to do anything. Now, what we call energy in, say, internal practices can be many different layers or many different densities. The way to actually experience it is not to look for something that you cannot perceive. If you cannot perceive due to this consciousness and the form effect that I described before, before you have sufficient concentration of information on something, something won't exist. So you do not start your energy work looking for prana or chi or whatnot, because you won't. You would feel something that you could call it if you didn't have any prior idea that the thing doesn't exist. That's so more simple. Someone is a hardcore materialist, it's no problem. Matter in itself is able to create a lot of changes, and the energy linked to matter is the flow of mass, the flow of actual tiny units of matter. So if you touch here and you actually move slightly, you stretch upwards. When you stretch, you bring a bit more matter, you create a vector force. So you're dragging tiny bits of matter, and you're spreading them in the direction of your stretching. So when you do that, you're actually making, for instance, when you stretch your fingers higher and you maintain pressure, you can feel there's a flow below your finger. And you could make this flow smaller, less and less dense, until eventually you touch and you'd be able to feel fluids. And when you're able to feel fluids, you'll be able to feel, say, the expansion, like the transmission of a wave of pressure. So the pressure coming from your breathing is rippling like a wave pattern. It's pushing the soft tissues, anything that's of lesser density, it's pushing it away when you're expanding, and it's coming back due to the pressure difference. You make over pressure, it's pushing away into the tissues. You make a depression, you depressurize by taking air out, and then it's the reverse. You have more pressure here, so the pressure changes direction. So these things are very, very simple, but to get back, you go here, you can focalize your awareness, you could focalize your intent. And its definition of intent would change too. It doesn't matter for now. You could focalize your imagination. You could picture things or imagine feelings, envision feelings, create or copy feelings that you've already had right there, and you would feel changes. You would feel energies. The changes would be the results of energies being applied, of movements and whatnot. So now create a strong pressure, and if you have nails, you can create a small feeling of pain. So what happens there? If you have any feeling of pain or whatnot, you can concentrate on this feeling. You can make it bigger by bringing more awareness and more consciousness into it. But at the same time, you can distribute or spread it. So that's what we'll do now. Start by focalizing. You focalize on the signal of the pain, which becomes bigger, until if you focalize sufficiently, you find emptiness. It becomes so small that it would disappear. But for now, we want to make it bigger. So focalize on the pain or the whatever feeling you have, and make it bigger. Just the feeling of pressure, for instance. And now reverse. Instead of being entirely in this contact, you can spread your awareness into all your body, even into space. So that's one part. For now, you haven't changed anything at the feeling of pain. You have just changed the distribution of your field of awareness. Now get back into the pain, reactualize it, make it bigger again. And now you will just spread the pain. You'll distribute it same way as though any atom of the ant was taking a small load of pain, and then any atom of the body you share evenly, and then any atom of a room. These are experiences, so things can happen or not. If they do not happen, you get back to something smaller, something more obvious. So now the concentrating or the distributing or spraying out of a feeling can be something your mind considers completely impossible. So it's a non-existence. It's something you've never perceived. You've never been able to do it, and for you it doesn't exist. So there, you do not stick to it until you turn crazy or you persuade yourself that I'm bullshitting you entirely. You go back to a density that you can understand. You apply real pressure that you're sure to perceive, and there you just stretch your hand in all directions, as though you were stretching the trampoline or any piece of cloth. So you have many things will happen there if you, for the scientifically minded, when you stretch up and down, the vector force that's coming here meets two vectors, conflicting vectors. The addition of the vectors will lessen the penetrating effect. So the basic addition of the vectors, you make the the polygon, you make the diagonal, and you get, so you get this added to this. If I go sideways at the same time, I divert. So picture a flow of people coming in, and then in the corridors you have other people who will give them directions, and say those people will give two directions. So you have half the people will go down, half the people will go up, or any distribution hereof. And then if you have 4 directions, you can have less and less people, less and less influence. 8 directions, even less. Then you spread it into space and make a volume instead of a surface, and it becomes less and less and less. And this can be explained if you have millions of ways to explain it. You could explain it through vector forces. You could explain it through the increase of tensile surface tension. Yeah, many ways. But the goal is not to persuade you or something, is to give you an experience. And if you do it on your belly or on your body, and say you get blows like that, you can tighten and concentrate the feeling, or you can spread it and spread it in space until the feeling is nearly nothing. But don't destroy yourself while doing it. So we've seen the same very, very simple relationship between a form, what can be done to this form, what can be done to this form by mind, focusing, concentrating. Concentrating can be a physical change, it can be a mental change too. I can concentrate matter, I can concentrate energy, I can concentrate information, I can concentrate people. If I concentrate all these things, what I've done is called like urbanization. I've done a city. If I, or a node, or nexus, whatever, if I distribute it, so if I bring it towards the periphery, peripheral vision, for instance, would be something different from distributed vision or global vision. I bring to the periphery, I'm just stretching my perception to the edges. But in between, it will be mildly deficient. Although, just through the vector, if you picture your units of perception as spies, if I bring my spies sideways and over an area, they will see things, even though they go to the edges of my domain or empire. in between they will see things. But still it will not be the same feeling as distributing evenly my spice or my informants all over the surface or all over the volume that I want to inquire into. I can concentrate my mind on a problem. I can try to go to the center of a center of a center of a center of an idea. I can try to go to the periphery, the edges, the beyond, and the beyond of the beyond, and so on and so forth, of an idea, of a form, of an action, a movement, or whatnot. I can spread the feeling of a movement in exactly the same way as I can spread and distribute the matter of the body that will enact this movement. So that's a very, very basic drop of content on how these ideas of, say, forms, flows, minds, how they can be applied in a few seconds. Just the idea of it allow you for same concentration. Let's go back to for just a second. I concentrate people, so I increase the density of a surface or of a volume. If I concentrate my muscles by tightening, so I make a smaller surface and I bring more muscle fibers closer together over the surface. So the density will be the relative proportion of emptiness, relative emptiness, and fullness, relative fullness. So if I create this concentration, eventually I will start to feel something happening in my fist. If I touch something that's the density applied here on this volume will create a pressure, a push. If I apply the pressure on something that has less pressure, I feel the flow. The people that are pushed into the room, they're sort of squeezed and they're trying to get out, especially at the periphery. So as soon as the door opens, you will have a distribution of the flow of people from the place where they're packed together tightly, especially if they move fast. They'll go to the area where they have room to spread and distribute the pressure. So this will give you another use of concentration and distribution or diffusion or dilution. The same exact thing would happen if I concentrated on a screen. All the energy goes to my eyes. It can be seen the tiredness that you see after prolonged use of computers and whatnot. It has many different layers, but one layer is the energy is leaving the parts of the body that are not used and is being concentrated in the areas that are used. If you bring more and more and more and more energy, so say you start working on the computer, at first your body would feel normal. Then you check maybe 10 minutes after, and maybe your feet are becoming cold. And you check maybe 1 hour or 2 hours after, and you cannot feel the half of your leg or maybe half of your body, or you lost a massive amount of blood flow, of sensation into all these areas. You do that sufficiently for a prolonged period of time, and you will lose matter. The actual building blocks of your body won't be invested to build up bigger corridors into your legs to allow for more flow of more energy. Your leg will shrink. What happens when, say, I have an injury now, it's been going on the foot, or misplaced something. It's been going on for now nearly 2 years or 1 year and a half. It changes massively my use of my legs, and over time it changes the size of the legs, of the muscles, considerably. Same principles. If I bring more and more and more into a room, the room will become smaller. Bring more and more energy into my brain by watching the 24 pictures per second or more on some screens over time, and I have this nervous energy and chi and whatnot, blood, that's getting stuck into space that's too tight for it. And from that I would start to feel it's compressing the sides. Over time you'd start to feel headaches or things like this. In the same way, you could distribute it by spreading the feeling outside in space. You could use all the feeling of pressure into your head and direct it to just one point, although you would still need to be fairly cautious of what you're doing. Say you bring everything to the forward opening of the third eye, all the extra pressure you feel. And there you'd feel something different. You could do the upward. If you do anything without any understanding that the corridors are supposed to be on their own without your participation, they will be sized to the use you have for them, one way or another. If you don't use the computers a lot and all of a sudden you use it, it's massively toxic. You do not have the infrastructure to guide the flows. Someone does that all the time, maybe has found ways to divert it or use it any other way, or is maybe just piling the damage. The same would go for someone using the body. You could most likely, most of your unconscious things would be to create the proper infrastructure, which would imply proper corridors, proper reserves, proper openings and closing, proper regulations. If you do not do that and you bring more energy of whatever type, more people cross a bridge than are supposedly allowed or by the structure of the bridge, and you may have a collapse at one point or damaging of the infrastructure. And before that you will have a slowing down and then a jam of the flow. So this still the same principle applied to a few other things. And principles like this is just one thing we can do with a dot. You can do many things with a dot, and you have many more units of beings than dots. Thanks.